Elizabeth Chappell, a lifelong entrepreneur who finally found my niche. After years of new ideas and jumping from business to business, I figured out how to turn a craft into a successful career. In 2016, I started a monthly subscription box for Quilters. That little startup has grown into a thriving, multiple six-figure business that I am so proud of. As a published author, designer of fabrics and patterns being sold throughout the world, my favorite thing to do is to teach others how to grow a career of their dreams. Each week, you'll hear from me or from other guests who are creative entrepreneurs, so you can learn exactly what to do and what not to do to grow a career that's more rewarding and successful than you ever thought possible. If you're ready to turn your craft into a career that you love, I am so excited you're here. Welcome to the Craft to Career podcast. Today we have a really fun guest. We have Michael Eason of Quilchemy. He is an EPP connoisseur, and you'll get to hear his story of how he got into quilting, because it's not a thing that he's always been drawn to or that came really naturally or easy for him. But for him to take this craft, this art, and to turn it into something he's able to teach other people how to do, and in a very outside of the box sort of way, it's really fascinating to hear. And once we were done chatting, Michael did tell me, and he was like, oh, I forgot to mention. So I want to mention on his behalf, he said the reason he even ever started teaching was because he was in a group with Libs Elliott, and she reached out to the members in that group and said, hey, would any of you want to teach? I have a spot that's opened up. And he reached out and said, actually, I'm kind of curious. I've never done this, but I'd like to teach EPP. And that's how everything kind of got started. So I wanted to mention that because he said that's really where things started for him. So I'm really excited for you to meet Michael. If you have not left a review for the podcast and you enjoy hearing from these different crafter and quilterpreneurs, if you could take just a second, whether it's in Spotify or podcast, to go and leave a review for the podcast. You can choose how many stars, 1 through 5, and then you can even write a little what you love the most, what you'd love to hear. And I read every single one of those. But more importantly, those reviews, when they come in, they help the algorithm to know, oh, people listen to this podcast. It's helping. And so they will share this podcast with other entrepreneurs. So this is kind of your way to pay it forward, to share this podcast with other creatives out there and help them to find it. So if you can take just a minute to do that, that's your way of paying it forward. And let's jump in and introduce you to Michael. Michael, thank you so much for being here on the Craft to Career podcast. For our listeners, can you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are in the quilting world.
Sure. Hey, Elizabeth, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So my name is Michael Eason. I can be found in various places online, but I'm a quilter, and I have really been working in the English paper piecing space for a little while, specifically with improv English paper piecing, which is something that I hadn't really seen much of out in the industry. And so I've really been kind of developing. I've got some classes that I teach, and some things like that. So yeah, I've got some upcoming classes and some really exciting things happening right now. So a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about this improv English paper piecing. But before we go there, I want to go back to, I was reading on your website about how you started quilting. I think it was your aunt, she gave you some wool squares.
That's right.
Tell me that story. And somehow you still loved quilting even after all that.
Yeah. So I was probably 13 years old when she gave me that bag of squares. And as a typical teenager, pre-teenager, they came home with me and they sat in an attic for many years. And so it wasn't until after she passed away that I was actually back home at my parents' house. And I was going through the attic and I was like, okay, wow, I haven't seen these in a while. Let me take these home. Let's see what happens. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, Mom, hey, do you have a sewing machine? Yeah, I haven't used it. Go for it. So took it home. Again, had no idea what I was doing. I think my saving grace was the fact that she had the instruction manual so that I could figure out how to wind the bobbins and how to do all of that, because I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've kind of fast forward to me kind of putting things together. And did I love the finished product? Not necessarily, because quite frankly, those wool squares were probably some of the most ugly things I've ever seen. But the process of it is what was something that really kind of held space for me, right? And so I knew that there was a lot that I could do there. We also happened to live at the time really, really close to the Amish community, and had been to some of the places and visited some of the shops and seen a lot of the more traditional hand-pieced quilts. And so kind of had a lot of inspiration at the time from those kinds of things. So I decided to just go to the library, because at the time, I mean, we're probably talking early 2000s at this point. And yeah, YouTube was a thing, but I didn't really look there at first. I went to the library and started looking for some books to see, how to get more acquainted with, my sewing machine and the supplies that I needed, and like learning about fabric and, things cutting on the bias. Like, had no clue what I was doing, really. But it just stuck. And I think I found, as you can kind of see behind me, I also grew to love just buying fabric, which I think all quilters do at some point fall into that category as well. So that's kind of how I got started, was just hooked on it. I can't really explain why it grabbed a hold of me quite the way it did, but especially at the age that I was, because I was like 20, 21, which is interesting, as I was thinking about that this morning. Like, how old was I when I started doing this? And to think of myself at that age and picking up a craft, it's kind of surprising a little bit, because you think of 21-year-olds. I have a son who's 21, oddly enough. And yeah, no, I cannot imagine him picking up something like this. So
right.
It's just an interesting story for how this got started.
Yeah, and it stuck. I mean, well, first of all, were you born in like 1980? Because I think we're
82.
about the same age.
82.
82. Okay, I'm 81. So, okay, yeah. But to go to the library and be that interested that you're like, I'm going to learn how to do this. I mean, clearly there's a part of you that loved the process, that just, it stuck with you. And then I know, like on your website, you mentioned going to QuiltCon in 2024, and this was a really big changing point for you. First of all, had you been to any other quilt shows before that? Was this your first one?
I had been to a couple quilt shows, but they were what I would consider very much so traditional. So like when you look at what's on display and even the vendors that were there, they're really marketing to a certain type of quilter, right? You may have like the Civil War reproduction fabrics, more of the floral and different things like that kind of in my mind go back to more traditional in nature. So QuiltCon really was my first introduction into what I consider more artistic and that modern quilt world. Like it just kind of blew my mind a little bit that first time going.
Yeah. So my first, I grew up with my mom quilting and I was not interested in it. And I went to Quilt Market, and that was my first like, aha, wow, this is cool, So talk to us about going to QuiltCon, what you saw, what it kind of ignited in you.
So shopping was obviously huge. Again, going back to the buying fabric thing, but then just being able to kind of wander the show and see what was really possible, right? When you look at quilting from through the traditional lens, you kind of have all of the similar patterns, right? You pick up a pattern and you kind of make that pattern, right? But from a modern quilting perspective, they're not pattern based. The majority of them are not. And, it's really more about that level of creativity and freedom that you have to create something that's artistic in nature. it kind of just opened the door for that permission to be free in what I was creating, right? That I didn't have to necessarily know all of the decisions at the beginning, which is really, really helpful for me because I don't like making decisions. I really don't. And so the less I have to make up front, the better off I am.
Do you like having your calendar open too? Like, do you get anxious when there's a lot on your calendar?
Yes.
Okay, because I do. As you said that, I'm like, yeah, it's like my
Sometimes.
calendar.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
So, okay, when I have been to QuiltCon, tell me if this is kind of what you're talking about. There are quilts that I look at where I don't even think they could make a pattern if they wanted to. Like, it is just so free form artistic. Like, I don't know how you could make a pattern. And I honestly don't know how some of them are made. I go up and kind of investigate and I'm like, how on earth did they do this? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
I'm trying to think in 24 what stood out to me. And I can't remember off the top of my head. I do remember, I think the best in show for 2024 was it's a bit of a political statement around gun violence and school shootings. I think that one probably stuck with me the most because of what it represented. You know, a lot of individuals, especially maybe more on the traditional quilting side, tend to say that quilting is not political. Well, it is, and it always has been. And that's just all there is to it. I mean, all you have to do is just look at history and you'll see it throughout. Messages were hidden in quilts. It's just always been. And so, looking at that particular quilt at QuiltCon let me again realize that there's so much more you can do with quilting. When you realize that it's fabric and thread and you can cut it however you want, right? And you can put it back together however you want. And the rules that come with maybe more traditional quilting can just go out the window. And so like really just kind of giving myself permission to let that happen.
I really would. Like, I've never done an improv quilt. Even just talking about it, because in my mind, I guess I'm probably more traditional in my piecing because it's like, even the Y seams kind of freak me out, which also opens up possibilities. But like, if it doesn't meet up here or here, So when you do these EPP, you've done the traditional, like the diamond, the hexies, but you're kind of branching out into different shapes. Is that right?
Absolutely. So the way this works is I typically start with like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock. And, one of the things that I teach in the class is, again, giving the students permission to be free with it, right? So what I tell them to do, you've got your paper on the table, take a ruler and just close your eyes and drop it. And wherever it goes, you then look at it, and wherever you are prompted to draw a line, draw it. Start where you want to start and stop where you want to stop. And then you pick up the ruler and you do it again. And really, it's until you've gotten the whole space kind of covered where then you realize, okay, I'm done with the design. And it's really interesting to see what some people come up with, right? I've had people do things from like a scene, right, of waves. And so they've done curves on the lower half of the page, but then they do something else on the upper half where they're really trying to capture that like a beach scene. I've had somebody who was a digital designer and she created a witch's hat and a moon, but she freeformed the whole thing. And her background allowed her to be able to do that. And so it turned out to be really, really cool when she finished it. But it's, again, you're creating the shape yourself. And really I try to get people to understand that there is no right or wrong line to draw when you're sketching this out. Curves are encouraged. They can be challenging sometimes. Fine points are encouraged. Again, can be challenging, but everything in quilting can be challenging until you learn it and you start to feel comfortable with it.
So true. It's very interesting. I can feel like the type A and me being very uncomfortable with this, which also makes me want to lean into it. I'm like, I have got to try that. So, okay, where do you teach? I know you mentioned you have some online courses that are coming soon, but
Yeah.
tell us all the places.
So, the one that I've got coming up the quickest is on the 18th of April, and it's with Crafty Monkeys. So that one is a virtual session. And then in May, I have Fiberfest. I was accepted to teach at Fiberfest. So those are in person in Chicago. Then in June, I was accepted to teach through Mancuso, the Mid-Atlantic, the schoolhouse. I forget what they call it exactly, but it's virtual. So I have 2 classes that I'll be teaching with them in June. And then I've got some local classes here just at a local quilt shop that have been picked up. So kind of a little bit of everything going on. And I just keep putting my name out there and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, so is this your full-time job? Do you have other work that you do? Okay.
Yeah. No, this is not full-time. It feels full-time sometimes, but
Yeah.
no, I actually work for a financial institution. I manage our debit card portfolio, which is a full-time job with Visa and MasterCard. So, yeah, totally
Very
different.
different.
Totally
Very different. Yeah.
very different. Very different. And, when I think about why I'm also drawn to quilting, that world is very process oriented and very specific in the things that you have to do to make sure everything works appropriately, right? And so when I think about quilting and this improvisational aspect to it, I don't get that freedom so much in my day-to-day job. And so because there's regulatory things, there's all sorts of stuff that goes into that. With quilting and the improvisational nature of it, I don't have to worry about any of that anymore. And so I really get to dive in and, as you mentioned, lean into my creativity and what I can accomplish with it.
Would you want this to be your full-time job if it could?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Goals.
And yeah, I mean, I try to be as realistic with this as possible. I know that financially speaking, I've got a long road ahead of me to get to where I would like to be if this becomes full time, right? But I feel like I'm trying to take those steps slowly, because I also realized that I think if I jumped in feet first, I would potentially drown, and that's not good for anybody. And so,
Right. Yes.
I think that I am trying to just kind of ramp things up slowly. Again, putting my name out there, saying yes to the things that feel right, and just seeing where it takes me.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said saying yes to the things that feel right. Have you had to say no to anything? You don't need to say what it is. I'm just curious if you've said no to anything.
Not yet.
Okay.
But one of the things that I'm unsure of right now is a lot of times quilters get pulled into ambassadorships and stuff like that, right? I don't know. So, as I think about what I'm doing, one of the things that is not my favorite is having to create social media content. I'm a quilter. That's what I want to do, right? And so, having to flip the switch to a whole different type of creativity to create social media is really, really hard. And so, knowing that a lot of times the brand ambassadorships need that to succeed, I'm not sure that that's where I want to spend my time. Because a lot of times there are significant commitments to that. It would need to feel right, as I said. It would need to be a good fit. And so one of the brands that I do work with right now is So Tights, right? So, and that's really because of the English paper piecing work that I do, trying to find easier ways to manage having to cut intricate shapes and being able to piece things back together with the magnets and whatnot, and not having to grip, because I tend to have to remind myself to relax a lot when I'm stitching. So
So tight. Okay, yeah, I do want to check that out. It's like a cutting mat and the ruler that goes on top and
Hmm.
it's magnetic. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, I am intrigued by that.
And I really like the round rotating cutting mat because, especially with these intricate shapes, being able to have it all held down with the magnets on the board means that everything stays in place and I can just rotate, change the direction, and still use my rotary cutter. In the past, before I got this, I was freehand cutting all of this stuff. I was drawing lines to manage the half inch, or not half inch, quarter inch to 3/8 inch inseam or seam allowance. Gosh, my words today. And then just having to kind of cut it out freeform and rough cut. And then I'd have to go back, and a lot of time and effort spent in just trying to get it cut down so that I didn't have so much extra bulk on the back. And so, having this So Tights board really has helped with that I can use it and just turn it and still use my rotary cutter.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious. Keep in mind, I have tried EPP once and I'm looking over. It's still sitting in a little bag. So I don't totally know what I'm talking about here.
That's okay.
But could a Cricut machine work for cutting out the pieces? And then you could make the fabric like, a quarter inch bigger or whatever.
In theory, yes. I think I've seen some people online use that. I also have recently, in the last 6 months or so, I have used the AccuQuilt dies. They have some EPP dies where the die is for both the paper and the fabric. So you can run it through for your paper and then run it through for your fabric. That's been helpful for the traditional shapes, right? For the improv stuff, it's all you've got to do it. It's manual, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
And so I know that going in, right? That the more intense that I make a design, the more time it may take me to have to cut it out, and also for the fabric portions, cutting it out, right?
So you have patterns that are available or they're going to be available soon?
So I'm working on them. So, one of the things that I struggle with patterns is there's a lot of words, right? And
yeah,
I just need to know steps, right? Of, okay, you need this much fabric for this particular shape, and you need this many of them. So, kind of thinking about how I need this to be accessible for myself. I'm trying to figure out how I write these patterns that are potentially English paper piecing patterns for people who are like that, who potentially don't need so many words. They just need some step-by-step instructions that really just give them what I said. With EPP, once you've got everything cut out, you're really just assembling, and it's kind of the same steps over and over again until you're done. It's not quite the same as a traditional pattern, right? At least not to me. And so, I've got a couple that I have drawn up, and I keep trying to write it, and I go back and forth. I don't like it. Doesn't make sense to me. And so, if it doesn't make sense to me, I don't want to put it out into the world until it makes sense to me, right? Because if it doesn't make sense to me, it's not going to make sense to somebody else.
Have you ever hired a tech editor?
Not yet. Again, thinking about this as a part-time gig kind of thing. I've been very careful about the money I spend on things that I know would help me, but also trying to be aware of not being cost prohibitive, right? I've not actually looked into it to see. It is on my to-do list to look at tech editors to see,
which is probably this long.
Right. I think during the last year and a half, I've changed my website 4 times from different companies, and just to get to one that because I would start with one and realize, you don't offer what I wanted, but you indicated maybe you did, but it's you got to go around your elbow to get to your knee to find it. I need simple.
Yeah.
And so, I'm trying to be cognizant of what I invest in. Knowing there's a financial impact there, that if I just get it out into the world, that it would return to me potentially. I just haven't pulled the trigger yet.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like if you're teaching classes, it'd be great to have your own pattern. Like, yeah, sign up for my class and get this pattern. Which website host are you going with? Which one did you, and are you happy with it now? Or are you like, oh, still not quite there?
So I have Shopify right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the moment, yes, I'm happy with it. I did find someone to help me because I just did not have the time to do some of the things I wanted to do with it. I need to go back and add some information about some of the classes that I'm teaching to it now. I think it really will serve me well when I'm able to dedicate a little more time to it, right? Which, is part of this whole process, right? Where I want to quilt. I don't want to be a website designer. I don't want to be a website owner.
Yeah.
I just want to quilt. And it becomes difficult when I see the amount of time that these other things take away from the thing I really want to do and that I really enjoy. So I try to be sort of aware of that, right? And make sure that I'm willing to exchange for the trade-off, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and it's tricky because I've thought about how great to be able to hire someone to do the website, do the social media, do the emails. But when you're not earning a ton of money, it costs a lot of money to hire people to do that, So for a time being, we're all solopreneurs, until you can get to, and usually, at least I found by the time I get to a threshold where I could afford to hire someone, I've gotten some systems in place where I'm like, I'm good. That doesn't take that long. But that learning curve, it sucks, man,
Yeah.
where you're just like, ugh.
And,
yeah.
For me, I want to jump into it. And I know I can't, right? Having a full-time job, 2 kids, husband, dogs, like life outside of this, I just don't really have the bandwidth to take extra stuff on. So I do little bits and pieces here, and I learn as I go, and I just dive in where I can. So.
Yep. So going back to designing, we'll say your patterns that'll be coming out soon. We'll just put that out there. So where do you get your inspiration from when you are creating your designs?
I love this question. And it's going to sound like the easy answer, but it's everywhere. And I'll explain. So our house, we have windows basically everywhere, and they're huge, and we're surrounded by trees. And sometimes at sunset, or even early in the morning when the sun is out, I will just look out the window. And especially now that it's still wintertime a little bit here, I can see all the lines of the trees and the branches. And so in my mind, I see how I can translate that right into potential EPP shapes where, other people may just see trees, right? I see all the lines that the limbs are making, that the trunk of the tree makes as it goes up. And sometimes as like the wind's blowing, I see them shift, and I really like the shift, right? And so I try to figure out how I can make that something I can incorporate in what I'm doing. I had a business trip a couple months ago where I went to Charlotte and was staying in a hotel, and I walked in and I was gobsmacked because the floor and the tiling up, I was like, I want to recreate this as an EPP pattern. Because it's just geometry everywhere, but it was so randomized that I was like, I need to recreate this. So pictures was what I did, was to take pictures so that I can kind of go back to it and figure out how I can recreate it. Sometimes I will see things like the TV will be on, and it will like it's not active, right? It's the screensaver pops up, and I have gotten a couple of them that are it looks like from an overhead view, it's like looking down on roads and greenery. And so you can see all of the shapes that are made in it and like how the roads curve around and where buildings are. It it's just a really cool view into something that you could turn into an English paper piecing pattern.
That is so cool.
So when you ask me where does it comes from everywhere. Like I see it in other people's art. I am constantly on the lookout for anything online that's geometric in nature. So I really, really like the mandalas that people will do, whether they're sketching it out and drawing them or painting or whatever. I zoom in and I'm like, okay, how do you do this? There are some artists where I'm like, hey, this would be a really great English paper piecing pattern. I have had one who's come back to me and said, hey, that's incredible. I'd love for you to do that. Yes.
Sweet.
So that's really cool too. So it's just a little bit of everything.
I would love to see your camera roll on your phone. I bet it's so random.
Yes.
And if someone went through, they'd be like, what a screensaver, you know?
I remember several months ago, we were driving here locally and I happened to look over and I don't even know what it is. It's some sort of statue or something. And I'm like, get the phone, take a picture. I need that picture. My husband's like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, yes. I need you to take a picture of that right there. He's like, what are you even looking at? I'm like,
see, I can't. And my husband, I'm like, don't hand me the phone, because his photos, I'm like, oh, but do you see? And I'll take the photo, like, see this and that. He's like, they look the same to me. I'm like, oh, no. And I appreciate my dad. Like growing up, I hated it. We'd be on a trip and he had the old school camera and he would stop and just take pictures of flowers, just he loves beauty for beauty's sake. I'm like, yes. Oh, I got that from my dad, So yeah, I love that. So what's your process then of looking at this artistic thing and then turning it into an EPP pattern?
It's kind of just trying to break it down into some of the base shapes that I see. So like if I'm going to take, for example, like that's what looks like a cityscape where I'm looking downward at it. I'm going to start in the middle of the paper. First, I need to decide how big I'm going to make it, right? So 8.5 by 11 is going to be a really small portion of that. I oftentimes will work with much larger sheets of heavier artistic paper. I forget what they call those, but it's usually like a 90 weight paper, because that seems to be good for when I cut it out. I've got some sustainability to that paper. And if I need to reuse it again, I can. So I first typically need to decide how big I'm going to go with whatever I'm doing. But then starting in the center, I kind of work my way out and try to just sketch out some of those base shapes that I see to figure out, do I want to do the whole thing or do I just want to encapsulate a specific section that I see in the image, right? And I just kind of go from there. There may be things that I add to it that I don't see in the image, right? Where, as I'm going through and sketching it out, I'm like, I kind of want to add something here because it feels like it's missing or what have you. I may change the orientation too of what I see. So it just kind of really depends because it's such an artistic thing, I guess, or method that it all just depends on what I'm doing. And I may approach things differently depending on what it is I'm trying to capture, right? Like if I'm looking out the window and I see something I really, really like, I may want to take that for what it is. I take the picture and then I try to recreate that exact thing. But if I'm feeling more creative, I may not do all of that. I may say, okay, in theory, I know what those trees look like. I'm going to try my own hand at sketching that out. And I don't care if it looks exactly like it looks out the window. It's really the concept that I'm trying to get of the lines and how, looking at a group of trees that are basically a forest or woods, how those trees build on each other and how those lines build on each other, right? As you look through and see daylight on the other side.
So cool. And when you said, I think it was something like, I look at it and I'll feel like something's missing here, it's something like that. I've felt that before. And it's interesting. I've noticed some quilters, if I show a picture of a finished quilt, they're like, what fabrics did you use? What layout? I'm like, it's just what I felt. It felt heavy over here and needed something there. But some people don't. They want exact step by step, like know which color to put where. But it is a very interesting artistic approach to it. So do you think then, you teach some people how to create their own, but then you're also planning to say, like, here, for those who want to just follow the steps exactly and make
Yes.
exactly what I have, you do this.
Yes. So I actually worked with the Paper Pieces company for one of my designs, and they were in the process of, I guess they had a lot of customers who wanted them to just sell 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper so that they could cut their own. And so I approached her about printing one of my designs. So I don't have it right next to me to show you, but it's a pattern called Limitless. It was actually my first foray into playing with striped fabrics with this design method. And she took what I had done and she printed it. And so, yes, I have about 75 of those sheets of paper right now that, if somebody feels intimidated in class by the aspect of having to kind of sketch this out themselves, I can say, here, I don't want you to be uncomfortable in this unless you want to be, because there is growth in uncomfortable. Here's an option for you. And you can just cut this out and you can do what you want with the fabric choices, right? Because again, to me, this can be for anyone. And the only limits to this is the limits we put on ourselves.
It's true. And the expectation that it needs to look perfect off the get-go, instead
Absolutely.
of like that messy middle.
Yep.
So what kind of things do you feel like stop people from trying EPP? I can tell you from my own experience, but I would love to hear from you what you think is like making people like,
So I'll start with myself. So I avoided English paper piecing for a long time because I thought that it was a very different skill set that I didn't possess. And I prevented myself from going down that path because I thought I couldn't do it. And so I just never tried. One of the things that I've seen in class is that for some of the people who have no experience with EPP, they just don't really know where to start, right? And, I think that one of the things that I've had success with is just saying, just breathe. That's all you need to do right now is just breathe, take a minute, and remove any expectations on yourself of what the outcome of this is going to be, right? Yes, you may have paid for this class, but ultimately you get out of it what you are able to put into it. And I can give you methodologies and tools, but ultimately it's what you do with those, how you deploy them, that makes this your creative work. And so I think that giving people that freedom to and asking them to give themselves permission to throw the rule book out the window helps with that success, right? Where, you get that ability of seeing someone's creativity kind of come to life because they've taken all of that off the table. It's really all about whatever feels right at the moment. And it's kind of putting feeling into this instead of the rules that, you would necessarily have to follow for more traditional piecing and quilting.
it feels almost like playing, when you're a little kid and you just go play and you don't think about what's right or wrong. It's just what's fun,
Yes. I literally just said that.
Yeah,
I think
I like that.
somebody the other day, like with this, it's, as adults, we over time have to come out of that play mode, right? And we forget how important it is to be able to go back and do that. And to me, that's one of the things I'm trying to encourage in class is please, please, please acknowledge your inner child. Play. Go to the colors that you loved as a child, right? Don't think about what you like right now. Think about what you liked as a 6-year-old, right? And go to that and see what happens, because that exploration, one, like, I feel like this does a lot of different things for people. One, it allows you to reconnect to your inner child, right? Which I think a lot of us need to do. Two, it reminds us of who we used to be, right? That maybe we're still that person and we've forgotten it, right? That there's value in that there were lessons and things that we learned at that time, or that we allowed ourselves to be, right? That we don't necessarily allow ourselves to be now because of one reason or another, right? Maybe it's our own self that we feel like we shouldn't do that, or somebody's told us we shouldn't, right? And so for me, I think it just kind of opens that door of self-exploration and creativity, and kind of helps extract that from someone.
And I was even just thinking, like, I think it was your story that you shared. There was a woman talking about, like, have you had progress? And she's like, oh, stop. Don't say not enough or not this, just yes or no. Have you had progress? And same, I feel like with EPP, it's this like, well, no, but you can see my stitches and you can da-da-da. It's like, no, you did it, like, you had fun, you dove in, you did it. And that is growth, that's success. And so I think with everything in life, like, just allowing ourselves to make some messes,
Yes.
and just play a bit.
And, just to touch on that, seeing stitches, I did this by hand. I don't care.
Right, thank you.
Whether that is appropriate or not, or accepted by everyone in the quilting community, I don't care. I did this by hand. And so if I see stitches, great. That means that I can actually account for every step of this process that I went through to create this piece of work, and that the stitching plays a part in that, right? Now, there may be some pieces where I choose to be a little bit more careful, or maybe I'll go the route of flat back stitching where you don't see the stitches at all. But that adds extra time, right? And so I try to remove that expectation that it's going to be perfect, because I don't want to be perfect. I want to be me, right? And I'm not perfect. And so my stitches aren't going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, I needed to hear that, because I did have a friend years ago when I bought this kit, and she was like, oh, my friend and I will joke like their stitches are showing. That's terrible. And I was like, and I didn't know anything about EPP. And I was like, okay, stitches should not show. They will laugh if they do. No, who cares? Like, this is me. And I think of William Morris, the whole arts and crafts movement that happened, I don't know,
yes,
a couple 100 years ago. I feel like we're coming back to that, with AI and all of this. It's like, we want the handmade, show me the stitches. I want some evidence that this is a human thing,
Right, exactly.
So, okay, in your workshops, one is, what's like an exercise or aha moment that helps people feel the joy?
I would say that one of the things that I've seen people kind of light up about is when they have sketched something out and they've cut it out, and they're doing the fabric portion where they're getting the paper wrapped with the fabric. And they've got an extremely challenging piece, let's just say. When I show them how to do it and I break it down so that they understand it's not, like, you may look at it and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? It's okay. Take a breath and let me show you. And when they are able to actually do it and repeat it, they're like, oh, okay, it's not that bad. It's not so hard. Once you kind of understand that there are a few things that you need to know about, wrapping the fabric around your piece, and the tricks that I've learned, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And then when you start stitching everything back together, knowing that you can deploy different techniques where maybe you are stitching two pieces together side back, like, I don't, this is going to be a bad example, but like maybe you've got two where you're doing side to side, but that may work for some, but then you may need to do flat back stitching on some of it because it just makes it easier for the piecing side of it. And I think when people start to realize that, again, even with putting things back together, there's a level of freedom that you have. Because I think the other thing is people are like, well, where do you start with piecing this back together? Wherever you want, right?
Yeah.
With these, it's you're cutting the paper apart yourself, right? And as long as you've taken a photo, because that's important.
Interesting. Okay.
Otherwise, it's a puzzle, and you may forget where puzzle pieces go. So as long as you've taken a photo of it and you feel comfortable with that, you can start anywhere. Like I will often pick up pieces that are just intriguing to me and work with those to start off with. Because one, I want the challenge of how is this going to fit together? Is it going to go together the way I need it to? And is it going to be hard, right? Maybe some of them might be a little bit more difficult to put together, and I want to know what I'm up against, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends.
I'll admit, this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I'll admit it. So I did not know before we had this call that you could just take a piece of paper, design it, cut it up, and like that was aha, like, oh my gosh. And now I'm curious, do people ever, as you're drawing your designs or whatever, do you ever number the pieces so that you don't lose track?
Yes.
Okay.
So the trick there is, because it's very random in the drawing, your numbering may or may not help you.
It could throw you off a little bit.
A little.
Okay.
And so, I think the picture that you take requires the numbering to have been done before you take your picture, so that you have that visual reference to go back to. In class, the picture is the only way, but in person, it's oftentimes easier to print that picture off so that you don't have to keep going. Like, your phone doesn't go to sleep as you're trying to look at it, and you're not wasting your phone battery.
Smart.
You can print the picture, post it on the wall, and then you're like, oh, okay, this one is here, this one's there, and so on and so forth. So, again, goes back to the tips and tricks that I've learned as I've done this. Ask me how I know to take a picture, because that was not a fun one.
Right.
But yeah, it's just a really cool way to engage with what has otherwise been a very traditional method of quilting, because English paper piecing has been around since the 1700s. And so when you think about its longstanding history, it's really incredible, some of those pieces and how long they've lasted throughout the generations. But also, for me, it's how do you breathe new life into something that has been so traditional in nature, which is really why I like to hone in on this whole improv piece, because it really does give some new life to that traditional piecing.
Yeah. Okay, these questions are totally off topic now, but I'm just going to ask because I'm watching you and I can see behind you. First of all, there's a couple books behind you. What are they? What, are you a book reader?
Those are, these up here are some Sarah J. Maas books. I have read those, yes. I have quite a few others here. Some have been read, some have not been. I like romance books, but typically in the LGBTQ space. But
because Sarah J. Maas is not, right?
She is not. However, a friend of mine got me hooked reading them, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it.
If you make me.
Yeah. But it's kind of interesting because to me, it's about being open to other experiences, right? And so, is it completely my jam? Not necessarily, right? But I was open to reading it, right? Because it just kind of goes back to human experience, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And it is what it is.
Yeah.
So
I'm a big
books.
reader. So when I see books, I'm like, ooh, tell me.
Yeah.
So very fun.
Yeah. Right now, I have several going, but have been really interested in Anne Rice's vampire novels because of Interview with the Vampire series that came out.
Didn't know about these. Okay. I wrote that down. I'll have to check it out.
They were written years ago, but I, again, picked them up at local bookstore that resells books. So, just...
Because Interview with a Vampire, that was like...
That was the
when
90s.
we were...
That was in the 90s.
I'm going to say we because we're about the same age. Yeah.
That's okay. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I remember that movie coming out. And then, okay, other question. The fabric behind you. I see some very softer, is it Christopher, the tattooed quilter, the blues and the whites? And then you've got these really bright, it looks like tulip pink.
This right here is Laundry Basket Quilts. And so, yeah, it's the kind of the blues to the white ranges. And then, yes, I've got like a lot of tulip pink up here. There's a lot here that I pick up because I'm looking at it from an English paper piecing standpoint, and like maybe more on the traditional side of how I can cut it and get that secondary pattern. So like doing fussy cutting with it. And so, yeah, there's a lot there. Some of these two lower shells are more of kind of what I had picked out when I first started quilting. And, thinking about more traditional kind of things a little bit, more muted, not as vibrant maybe. But yes, I've definitely come into my tulip pink era. The other thing too that I didn't really ever use was solids. I didn't have a single one in, like, when I first joined the Modern Quilt Guild with QuiltCon. I didn't have a single solid. No, I didn't have white. I didn't have black. Nothing. Everything I had was a pattern. And so I've had to kind of adjust to the fact that solids do have a place. And, I still work through it. I still have to struggle a little bit with it because I don't always think in terms of a solid, right? I tend to be a bit of a maximalist when it comes to my fabric choices. And that's okay.
Yeah. Well, in the photo on your website, I love you're sitting on this couch and there's a pillow with you and there are these pink, maximalist fabrics, and I love it. Like, I wouldn't say I'm a maximalist, but I love whatever that is. So yeah, I'm digging that.
Yeah, that's a Home Goods buy. I don't know if you're familiar with Home Goods, but I've spent a bit there because I like to buy pretty things too.
There's some good finds there. Yeah, you got to look a bit, but yeah, they have some good stuff. So for our listeners, if they want to know more, if they want to join a class, come and learn with you, where is the best place for them to find you?
So Instagram is where I do most of my posting and things like that. My handle is Quilchemy, Quilchemy. There is my website, which is www.quilchemy.com. If you're looking at classes, I have just created a link tree attached to Instagram, and I've got all of the classes linked there so that, depending on what you're looking for, if you're local here in North Carolina, maybe you want to come to an in-person, or if you are able to travel and maybe going to be in Chicago, come check it out.
Awesome. So I was going to ask, where are you? You're in North Carolina. Okay.
I am. Yep. Eastern North Carolina.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time to chat with the listeners here and share about your journey in EPP. It's been really insightful and motivating.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Michael, thank you so much. What a fun conversation. I left feeling empowered and motivated to tap into like that inner play. There's things now after just sitting and chatting with Michael that I'm like, I'm going to make this happen. They're not even EPP related, but it just woke up that creativity in me. So I hope you listeners experience that to some level, whether it even be for your own business or for your own artistic, creative capabilities. So Michael, thank you so much for being a guest here on the podcast. And listeners, be sure to go take a look, see his classes, follow him, and enjoy his creativity and his business.